industries. So let's jump into it. I'm going to introduce our presenters. First of all, we have Darshil Shah. He is a Marketo architect working at Deloitte. And then we have Corey Bayless, who is also a Marketo architect working at TA Digital. So guys, I'll hand it off to you. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kiara. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. As you know, Darshil and I are passionate about the technical aspects of Marketo, and so we've prepared a presentation that should cover, I think, most of what you can do. And if it doesn't, we're definitely open to any questions that you might have at the end, but our agenda is as follows. First, we'll start off with a small introduction for Darshil and myself. Then we have some audience polling questions, so we can learn a little bit about who's in the audience and just some of the information that we can pull from that. And then we'll jump right into API crash course, 0 to hero. Followed up with Marketo API concurrency, best practices, security best practices, and then everyone's favorite, the webhook versus the API, the mysterious webhook, right? Bulk API, import, export, and then cloud integrations, cloud storage, what integration landscape looks like. And then we'll get into some really fun stuff, which is some custom scripts and some Power Queries that Darshil and I have set up. So, and if we have time, we'll answer any remaining questions that you might all have.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Corey and Kiara as well. So, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on from your joining. I work as a senior consultant at Deloitte, and I am a 3-time Marketo certified expert, 2-time certified architect, subject matter expert, champion, and 2023 Experience Maker Award finalist. I have been into 4+ years working as a consultant into the consulting industry, and I have been into multiple projects where I have delivered end-to-end Marketo engagement strategy and implementation work for our clients. And I sure do have a knack for coding and custom development. I like to call myself as a full stack developer, working as a front-end developer, back-end, as well as the database developer as well. Apart from all the Marketo engagement certifications that I have, I'm also AWS certified solution architect, and I have worked on a lot of AWS services. But the most prominent services that I worked are Elastic, Serverless, Compute S3, Route 53, and IAM. In terms of my footprint and experience working with Adobe Experience Cloud products, it includes, of course, the Marketo Engage. Apart from that, I also hands-on working experience with Commerce Analytics, Experience Manager, and Experience Platform. Includes Journey Optimizer and Orchestration as well. But of course, my core expertise lies around Marketo Engage, as a lot of you will already know. And apart from that, I also worked with the Marketo Visible. And as Corey has covered, we have a jam-packed all the meaty good stuff rolled down in the presentation. So excited to be presenting on this topic with Corey. And thank you so much for taking your time and joining today. Over to you, Corey.
Awesome. Thank you, Darshil. Yeah, a little bit of my background. I've been in this industry about 10 years, worked on some really, really big Marketo instances, enterprise specific, Microsoft and AWS, and then some Expedia and all kinds of different experience when it comes to sort of the large enterprise instance, right? I'm a 3-year Marketo champion. I'm a 4-time certified MCE. Pretty much consider myself relatively close to being a full stack developer, but definitely can cover all of the end-to-end integrations for Marketo. Definitely can speak to them. That's what being an architect is all about. But I also have a love of cloud solutions and how we can integrate AWS solutions or Azure or Google solutions into Marketo to basically, streamline and make our MOPS lives easier, which is always a good thing, right? I love to publish Python applications, and I like to basically, do what I can with the API, and I love to write code. So I've been doing it for a while, and it's definitely something that I'm passionate about, and I'm excited to share that with you. I also am in the process at TA Digital learning all the different integrations with the Adobe Experience Cloud. So I'm getting to see a lot of AEP, Journey Orchestration, CJA, all of the various integrations that are capable on the Adobe stack, as well as how they integrate with Marketo. And it becomes a pretty significant powerhouse once you get them all together. And then obviously, I really enjoy ABM. I was a thought leader at my previous company. And yeah, so that's a good look at what I do. So moving on. So we're going to take a couple of audience poll questions. And so go ahead and see on your screen, and you can answer the questions in front of you, and then we'll go ahead and calculate the results. Nice. Some good stuff coming in here. Ooh, we got some very, very familiar with Marketo Engage integrations. I like it.
Yeah.
Data syncing for sure. Complex config.
Loving the response here.
Ooh,
Thanks,
automated
guys.
campaign management. Nice, I like it.
Yeah.
That's definitely a hot topic for for this quarter. I'm seeing a lot of how do I automate my campaign deployments? I see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Advanced reporting, personalization, segmentation, nice. And don't forget that for the others, please post them in the chat so that we can learn a little bit more about anything else. That what does automate campaign deployments even mean? Oh, it means a lot of different things. Yeah, we'll definitely we'll cover that in the Q&A section for sure. We can go into that. Cool, 90%. Nice. Thank you all. 92%. Oh, we're almost there. 8%. Nice. All right, we'll give it another 15 seconds or so, and then we'll jump in. Nice. Perfect. All right. Let's get into the content. That was super helpful. We'll definitely talk about that at the end in terms of what all of this means. So let's go.
So yeah, let's, as promised, we are going to start with the very basics of API, what the heck API means. So as you know, like probably a lot of people who know, API stands for Application Programming Interface. In very simple terms, it is a way for two systems to communicate. So two disparate systems who are running on different technologies. Technologies, it doesn't matter. One could be running Python script, one could be running on Java, platform stack, etc. Doesn't matter. API is something which helps those systems to communicate, transfer data seamlessly. So there are different types of APIs available. We have REST APIs, SOAP APIs, RPC APIs, WebSocket, GraphQL APIs. In terms of today's session, and as far as the Marketo Engage scope goes, we are going to be talking a lot about REST APIs. Marketo also, has SOAP APIs, but they are kind of in the end of support phase. Marketo is not doing any further development in SOAP APIs or the APIs that are present. They are in a working condition, but all the future development or the present development that are going to be happening around the REST APIs. So we are going to be covering a lot about Marketo's REST APIs in the subsequent slides. Yeah. So Marketo, as I said, we'll be talking a lot about REST APIs. So Marketo exposes, endpoints, REST API endpoints, which basically allows the remote execution of the system's capabilities. When I say system, of course, I mean Marketo here. And as I, covered earlier, APIs are gateway, or it allows us to, communicate data, transfer data from one platform to another platform. So APIs, the REST APIs that Marketo Engage has made available for us to use, it's a window for us to, talk to Marketo remotely instead of without getting into GUI, without logging into your instance itself with your credentials. You can use REST APIs to communicate with the Marketo Engage to sort of automation, create programs, activate campaigns, a lot of things. And of course, there are different categories of APIs. We have lead databases, set APIs, authentication, user management, and the JavaScript APIs as well, which includes Forms 2.0, Munchkin, web personalization, predictive content as well. I would like to invite Corey to talk more about the, API categories, and in case he wants to add anything there as well.
Yeah, no, it's good. Good coverage on a lot of what Marketo REST covers. It's important to understand the differences between the Marketo API categories because they touch different things, right? So with your lead database, right, your lead database is going to be what all of the resources in your lead database that touch anything that has to do with PII or customer data, right? Marketo being a primary CDP, customer data platform, that means that Marketo can store customer information in their database, right? You have to have special certifications to be able to do that. So it's really important that you understand kind of the difference between what is a CDP versus what is not a CDP, right? Adobe Analytics, not a CDP. You don't store data you don't store specific PII data for those particular platforms. But lead database is going to be anything from your smart campaigns all the way up to your program member statuses, anything that really touches the lead. You're going to be able to find everything, within your lead database itself. The asset section is going to be everything that's a Marketo resource that is going to be programs, anything that doesn't touch any type of lead information, right? So you're going to be your programs, your program IDs, your campaign IDs, your forms and all the various other resources that are available. You have what are called controllers. And as you can see over here in the right side, you've got a form controller. And a form controller is how I like to think of my APIs when I build them out, right? If I build an API and I need to connect with all my forms, I would route to this documentation and I could basically look and say, oh, what are all my capabilities that I can do with a particular form? If you can do it in the UX of Marketo, you can likely do it through the API. And that's because of how robust the documentation is for Marketo. You'll find a lot of systems don't actually even come close to matching what Marketo's API is able to do. And that's one of the things that makes it really fun to play with, but also you can automate a large amount of things that will definitely help with your workloads as an admin, as a Supermops admin, right? Your admins are definitely going to be the people who are going to be most interested in being able to utilize the API and figure out how do I increase my workflows while also reducing the amount of time I actually spend having to build those workflows, right? That's kind of how I always think about it. If it's a rinse and repeat process, it likely can be automated. So just a kind of a good way to think about it. Authentication is going to be your bearer token. That's your authorization getting into the system. User management, that's your users and creation process within the backend of Marketo in the admin section. And then your JavaScript API, right? So we've been talking a lot about backend APIs, but you also have your front end APIs. Like a JavaScript API is going to be your Forms 2.0, your lead tracking, web personalization, and predictive content, and all the other various features that are available, right? And as Darshil would say, when API documentation is clear, it's a
API picnic. I always get that wrong, but yeah. So absolutely. I mean, having worked with a lot of APIs, not just Marketo APIs, with other platform APIs, I can definitely say for sure that Marketo's APIs have been documented very well. And we have a separate, a website just where all the APIs and all the developer things reside that goes by developers.marketo.com. I absolutely love that, so that it's not mixed up with the core product documentation that is hosted on the Experience link. So absolutely well documented. Everything is, there are examples of the, post calls, body, payload, request, response, etc. Very well documented in the developer documentation. And I'll be honest, when I first started with the Marketo's REST APIs, I didn't have clue what are the things that I can do with the APIs, what are the endpoints that are available for me to use. But everything, it was super easy to learn, especially given that the documentation is very well maintained, updated regularly too. So yeah, absolutely love the documentation here. Yeah. So let's now discuss what are the things that you need from Marketo's end to make your first API call. So of course, as I said earlier, while making an API call, you are talking to Marketo remotely. You are not going to log into your instance with your credentials. You are going to be using your API users' credentials to authenticate yourself and do the action that has been mentioned in the API, basically. So of course, you will need an API user. You can create one by going to admin under users and roles, and there's a small little check mark that you can tick. Let's say that goes by API user. So when you check mark that, an API user would be created. You of course do not need a valid working email address as an user, as a user ID for an API user, unlike a normal user. And once you are done with the done creating an API user, that's not it. You would need to create a custom API service. So when creating a custom API service, you can basically under the admin, you can go to launch point, create new service, and create a custom API service and tie it with the user that you just created in the step one. And as soon as you create that custom API service, you can get the client ID, client secret of that service as we have in the snapshot. And there's an option to generate the access token right there from the UI itself. And we also have authentication APIs through which we can dynamically get the access token by by sending the client secret and client ID of an API user. So, and of course, you will need your Munchkin ID of your instance, which will be acting as a base URL of all the API calls that you make to Marketo. So, I mean, at first, if you are not that into tech, you're not that into API and stuff, this process may sound tedious, but and probably long, and probably a lot of words may not make sense. But once you get used to it, if you do it once, I am pretty sure that this process is going to be, super easy, super breeze process kind of thing for you. So yeah, I mean, that's it. All that you need to, from Marketo Engage that you need to set up in Marketo Engage for making your first API call. That's it. And yeah, would you like to add here anything, Cody?
Yeah, it's one of the things that people, I think, miss a little bit is the difference between what is a native integration versus what is a custom integration, right? And launch points give you the ability to create that custom integration. Whereas if you're using like a GoToWebinar, you've got all of those services that are created inside, but all of that is really stored in launch point, right? So when you think of any type of third-party integration into Marketo, generally that's going to be found in your launch point connections.
Yeah. That's a great point. And we have a slide dedicated, integration landscape slide where we discuss all the different types of, integrations. Good point there. Yeah. Could we move on to the next slide? Yeah, thank you, Kiara. So, while we are making this API calls to Marketo, there are certain limits that we need to be, knowing, because we cannot make kind of infinite calls, because that is going to overwhelm the Marketo. And since Marketo being a SaaS tool, it needs to, put certain limits so as to have a proper functioning system. So at the very minimum, for the base, for the very basic subscription, there's a 50,000 API call per day limit, which resets every day at 12 a.m. Central. So 50K represents the number of unique API calls that you can make to Marketo. Each call that you make to Marketo counts as one call, and counted against the quota of that day. And a lot of times, at a lot of instances, I have seen, this 50K API calls getting exhausted pretty quickly. So there's an option where you can reach out to a Marketo CSM, get this, daily quota limit extended. Of course, this, comes with a charge, but if it is required by a business and you have valid use cases for it, this is something that you could definitely opt in for. And apart from daily quota, we have rate limit. So Within 20 seconds, there's a hard-coded rate limit of 100 calls. So in a span of 20 seconds, you cannot send more than 100 API calls to Marketo. And there's a concurrency limit as well. When I say concurrency, I mean the number of concurrent API calls that are being sent or run and are under the processing state at a single point in time simultaneously. So at any given point in time, there could just be 10 maximum of concurrent API calls that Marketo could be processing. And as soon as you hit any of these three limits, there are different error codes that you're going to see as a response being sent by Marketo, which is on the right in the table. If you hit the daily quota, you're going to see a 607 error code in a response. If you hit the rate limit, if you like on your 101 call in the span of 20 seconds, you're going to see 606 error code. And if you exceed the concurrency limit, you are going to see a 651 code, being written by the Marketo Engage as a response. And of course, subsequent API calls are throttled. And there's a very nice way where you can see all your daily quota, the limits, and the API quota basically that you have consumed. You can go to admin, and in the web services you can check how many API calls that you have used for that particular day, broken down by API user. And yeah, apart from that, the Marketo Engage also added a feature where we can check the amount of data that has been consumed for the bulk export and import as well. So yeah, anything you would like to hear, Corey, as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, you covered, I think the key here being you need to know where to access that information in web services and the admin. Super important, right? That's definitely the key. Daily quota, as you said, can get exhausted quickly, right? You will start to see your calls fail. Now, if you have mission critical calls that need to be made back and forth from Marketo, this can actually be very detrimental to you and your company and your business and what you're doing. So you need, as an admin, to be very aware of what is your concurrency. What is your out of the box concurrency? Everyone out of the box, 50 calls a day, right? But you can actually maximize that to 1.5 million calls a day. Right. So it really depends on what is the need of the business. Are you still seeing a good inflow and you're not getting, any of those daily quota errors? And if you're not, then you're kind of right in the threshold that you want to be. But if you are consistently exceeding that on a daily basis, increasing your API concurrency is definitely a recommendation for sure. All right, now something that's near and dear to my heart, API security best practices. And I actually did API post. Okay, cool. Yeah, so API security best practice. Saw a question that came through about the user that you want to create for your API custom integrations, and I'm here to cover that. So when you think of API security best practices, the API is a gateway directly into your system, meaning that if I give away the farm and I click the button, give all permissions to my API user, my integration user is now going to have access to not only all my resources, but all of my lead data. And if you give them read-write access to your database, guess what? If a bad actor catches or gets that information, it can be really problematic for you because you're not going to be able to tell, except for the integration user that you've created, that there's a lot of calls that are happening against the system. So you need to be, as an admin, very aware of how you create your credentials in Marketo, right? So what I mean is that only give access to match the requirements for the application, the service, or the process that you're building towards. Too many permissions, that's not going to be a good situation for you, right? One of the things that I like to do, and Darshil and I definitely connected on this, is it's really good to create an API user that's specific for your lead database, and then an API user that's specific for your resource database, right? So how I talked about that before was anything that touches your lead database, you really want to separate those two. That's definitely something most people should take advantage of, and I highly recommend it. Don't give away the farm when creating users. Now, when you think about a new role that you're creating, just don't check all the boxes, right? Any admin in Marketo is going to know that if I check all the boxes, I'm giving all of that access away, right? We don't want to do that in this case. Be very specific with what you're doing. If we only want to read stuff, and we only want to do gets, like get information, don't use read. If you want to be able to write posts, I saw a question that came through about what is a post call. A write into a database or a write into Marketo is what is called a post call, right? And there are several others, but those are the primary two that you're going to cover in Marketo. Then the next thing is protect your API codes at all costs. Do not allow this information to get transmitted through email. Don't send it unencrypted. Always protect it at all costs, right? One of the biggest things also that a lot of people are like, well, how do you protect your API credentials when you're in cloud, when you're building in cloud, cloud infrastructure? Well, there's an example of AWS has a service called Secrets Manager, and Secrets Manager uses a standard encryption method, or you can use what is called KMS, which is encryption. And you can basically encrypt that any and all requests that go through that utilize those codes are all going to be fully encrypted through KMS or through standard encryption. So that makes sure that any IP that's actually traveling out of that cloud or out of that architecture is going to be fully encrypted, and you cannot view it, or you basically can see that IP going through if you're a bad actor. A lot of hackers are able to see those ports. That's why that stuff's really, really important. So anything else that you might want to add for best practices there, Darshil?
Yeah. One thing I would like to add here. So I personally have seen, a lot of people, I would say a lot of companies actually, exposing their, credentials, secret, etc. on their front end. So basically, they have their forms, they have their assets, they are making direct calls to Marketo's database, Marketo, right from the front end. So that is not a best practice. And I think I have posted multiple times on LinkedIn and community saying that this is not a best practice. You should always be routing data over to a backend server that in turn makes a call in a secured fashion to Marketo, and that backend server houses your secrets, basically your client ID, client secret. Never ever have your client ID, client secret right into the right into your front end. So anybody can, like, if they inspect the element, if they view the page source code, they are going to see your secret. So that is an instance where you open up a massive vulnerability to your Marketo's database, to your entire Marketo. Basically, if anybody, malicious actor gets hold of those credentials, they can make API calls to your Marketo, basically ruin your Marketo database. So yeah, just wanted to call it out specifically.
Yeah, no, and that's also, yeah, for sure. So any web related information that you have on a web page is actually searchable on an internal. So that's one of the reasons why like JavaScript CAPTCHAs don't work, because a bad actor can actually see what is the secret code, and you can scan for that information. So web front end, right, is all available and open source for somebody to be able to see. And then one other thing that I also wanted to mention was make sure that when you do actually send your calls, right, you need to make sure that you're using TLS 2.0, which is HTTPS, which is an encrypted call that's coming through the web, right? If you use HTTP, that's not encrypted, and that's also super important. I highly recommend all admins get familiar with that process, because if you have customers submitting form data through an HTTP, all of that information is viewable. You can see that detail coming through, and you can see all that PII that goes through. It's not encrypted, right? So just make sure you're familiar with that. Okay, I think we've definitely covered best practices. This is good stuff.
Awesome. So now let's discuss, Webhook versus API. I have, got a lot of questions on, and of course, Corey, and of course, a lot of people who have got a lot of questions who are into the space on what the heck is difference between Webhook versus APIs. So a lot of times people start using APIs, they start using Webhooks, but when it comes to what to use when, what is the difference between both of them, they kind of get blunt. And, with this slide, I would want to, try to clear clouds around the Webhook versus APIs in a very simple manner. So, so the real confusion arises because the Webhook call, in turn uses API call to the third-party web service. So that's and when people get to know that Webhook in turn uses an API call, then if I make an API call to Marketo, what's the difference? What's the difference between an API call and Webhook call? So I have a small little graphic towards the top of the presentation that that shows the direction. So from the frame of reference of an Adobe Marketo Engage instance, if there is any data communication, if there is any call that is being that is an inbound call to Marketo Engage, we call that as an API call. So there's that could be a client, that could be an agent that is making an API call to Marketo to send an update, to write data, to get query the data, then it's an inbound API call. And from the same frame of reference, from the Adobe Marketo Engage's frame of reference, if there is an outbound flow of information from Adobe Marketo Engage to a third-party web service, of course, that is going to happen. All data transfers within the web happen via API. So that is in turn going to use the API call itself. But the direction of data is crucial here. So if the direction of data is from Adobe Marketo Engage to the third-party web service, of course, via API, then we call it as a web call. So there you go. That is the core difference between API call versus web call. And if you understand this difference correctly at any given point in time, you can very accurately say that you are going to need to make an API call to Marketo, or are you going to be using web call from Marketo to call that third-party web service, pass data to that third-party web service, and in turn that third-party web service is going to process that data, maybe return some response, and you can write those data points to Marketo field as well. So I have some bullets, and I think I covered key parts of it, but I will for the sake of completeness, I will also go through this. So as I said, the webhook, those are server initiated. That is, the calls are being initiated by Adobe Marketo Engage, not a client, which is the case with the API calls. And the webhook calls, more like they are being used for real-time updates for specific events. So for example, so as you would know, we have a webhook call that we can use in a trigger campaign. So the trigger campaign is listening for certain events, and on those certain events, if you want to send an update to a third-party web service, then we use the webhook call. That's the apt use case of a webhook call. But in case we want to get data from Marketo, if we want to post some data to Marketo, request for data or action, we are going to use API calls. And as I said, webhook are outbound calls from Marketo, and API calls are inbound calls to Marketo. So always consider Marketo Engage as your frame of reference, and get the direction of data flowing to or from Marketo, and that would decide whether that is going to be a webhook call or it's going to be an API call. And webhook, they are compulsorily stateless in nature. API call, they are by architecture stateless in nature, but it is very much possible with some custom development to introduce statefulness architecture in multiple API calls as well. And when I say stateful or stateless, I mean to say that between consecutive calls, webhook calls and API calls, there's a possibility of preserving data, transferring those data points from one webhook call or one API call to another API call. So that is like preserving, the act of preserving state is what I mean by stateless or statefulness. And of course, if you are going to be making a webhook call, you would need to have a webhook compatible web service. Here in case the service that I've been referring to, the third-party web service, you are going to be needing a third-party web service that has an exposed API endpoint to which you can make a webhook call from Marketo. And of course, if you're going to be making API call to Marketo, you're going to be needing REST endpoints or maybe SOAP endpoints for you to be able to make calls to Marketo. And yeah, one very important point that Corey added to this deck was utilized at the program level. So webhook, they are utilized at the program level. So you have your smart campaigns within programs. Those trigger campaigns, they are going to be having, if required, a webhook call flow step action. So that instance is at the program level. You can use your my tokens, custom tokens at the program scope itself. And when it comes to API call, they are more of a global thing. So you create your launch point service, custom service at an instance level rather than creating those at the program level. So I believe that would have helped, clearing up some clouds between webhooks versus APIs. And now when you come across situations where you need to integrate Marketo with any third-party system, you can very confidently say that are you going to be needing a webhook call or are you going to be needing an API call for that particular integration. Anything else that you would like to add here, Corey?
No, you definitely covered a good amount with webhooks versus APIs. I do really like to emphasize that when you're using a webhook, it's utilized at the program level in the flow step, right? It's the call that's being made. A lot of webinar providers that use webhooks, this is what they're doing. This is how you pinpoint directly to where you want the data flow to go, right? And that's a great way to think about webhooks. In terms of the custom integrations and API, that's more of a bulk enablement. Like I can capture all of the things that are in my system as opposed to just specifically to one thing. So, but yeah, no, nicely done, nicely covered. That made sense.
Awesome. So let's discuss about bulk import and export APIs over the next few slides. So we have been talking a lot about normal REST API endpoints. So these REST API endpoints, the normal non-bulk API endpoints, they would allow you to query data, post data in a limited manner. For example, if you're querying leads using the lead API, at a single point in time, you can only retrieve 300 records in a single API call. But that is like 300 is something that is like pretty less number, I would say. So in case you have like million of records, thousands of records, then you would wanna export or import, update, etc. That is not very scalable option. And remember, we talked about the limits. So if you are gonna be doing in a batch of 300 records, you're very easily gonna exhaust your limits pretty easily. So to combat that, Marketo Engage has bulk extract and import APIs. So these APIs basically allow you to make updates to Marketo or get data from Marketo in bulk. Unlike the normal API endpoints that that are pretty limited in the number of records that they can update in a single call, these allow you to update a huge chunk of data in a single call. So there are two types of bulk APIs: extract and import. Using extract, it's the name is pretty evident. You can extract data from Marketo. Using the bulk import APIs, you can post data to Marketo in bulk. And of course, bulk APIs, to be very clear, a lot of people, they think that bulk APIs are a different, like they work on a different architecture and they are not a REST API. But bulk APIs are RESTful API services, which means that they are going to be using the normal HTTPS request to interact with Marketo Engage. And the non-bulk APIs, they are also like talking about the REST APIs, they also run on the REST architecture. It's just that the way that these APIs have been architected is different. Bulk APIs have been architected to get or post data in bulk, whereas the normal REST APIs, they've been architected to make updates for a limited number of records. And of course, you are going to be using the same authentication principle, the same OAuth 2.0 authentication principle for authenticating your bulk calls over to Marketo within bearer access token as well.
So I would add, if we go real quick back to that. So one of the things that also needs to be known is that there's two types of concurrency limits in Marketo. One is going to be your API concurrency, while the other is actually going to be your bulk export concurrency, which is actually going to be measured in gigabytes. So the typical out of the box integration is going to have 50 gigabyte max in terms of how much you can actually export out of the system. And once you breach that, you're actually going to hit a quota blocker, basically an error handle that basically says you've overdone your quota. So bulk APIs, definitely there's a lot to them. There's definitely, and Darshal's going to cover this in the next couple of slides in terms of the process for running an export. It's a lot easier to import data into Marketo than it is to export data out of Marketo. And I would imagine that that's obviously by choice. But the really important thing is that these also have quota, and also the queue, there's a queue that you actually need to know about in Marketo in the backend. So there's a maximum of 10, and there's only 2 concurrent jobs that can run at the same time with bulk exports. So definitely, if you're running a lot of workloads, you're going to start queuing up those jobs. And then I'll let Darshil talk about the 4-step process for actually extracting that data, because I just saw questions come through. So take it away.
Yeah. Awesome. Could we please move to next slide? Yeah, thank you so much. So, for extracting, as Corey mentioned, importing data is a lot easier than exporting data out of Marketo, and probably that is by design or architecture. So if you want to, extract data out of Marketo, the first thing that you would need to do is, create a job. So we can, like, there are certain, like, different type of bulk export APIs you can export activities, you can export your program member fields, you can export your leads and custom objects as well. So based on what object, what data you're trying to export, you are going to be creating a bulk extract job for that particular object or activity or the data that I would say. And this is going to be a post call to Marketo. And in the body, you are going to be sending, certain parameters, filtering parameters based on which you are actually, filtering your entire Marketo's lead database, your activities, etc. Whatever data you're trying to extract from Marketo, you're going to be mentioning in the post request in the body that I would want to, extract all the data between so and so date. And in case you are, so in this example, that you can see on the screen, these are snapshots from my Postman. So this is basically making an extract call to the activities endpoint, bulk activity export endpoint. And you can see there are certain like 3 activity type IDs that I mentioned. So these are the unique IDs that are associated to these activities, this respective activities, and you can filter and get data for those specific activities between the time range that I have mentioned in the earlier couple lines in the JSON. So that's how like you can add certain more filters, and that is very well documented on Marketo's developer documentation page. Based on that, you can filter using these filters. You can get hold of the exact right data that you want to export out of Marketo. So once you make this API call, you create a job, and Marketo returns a job ID. And of course, in the status, it's gonna say that the job has been created. So the job ID that you get is something that you are gonna be using to enqueue this job. So till now, you just created a job. It's not in the processing state. You need to enqueue the job. So there's a separate post call that goes into it. And in that post call, as a query parameter in the URL itself, you're going to be adding that the job ID. And once that call is successful, that job is queued. And if you go on to the next slide, so once that job is queued, it's gonna be running in the Marketo engage basically, and using the status endpoint, and that is a get endpoint. You are gonna get the status of that particular job that you enqueued. You can get the status of that job. That could be 3 status. It could be queued, it could be in the processing state, or it can be completed state. So as for in most cases, as soon as you make enqueue a job, if you make a call to the status endpoints, you are probably going to see queued, or in some cases, if the job is pretty light, you are going to see a processing. And of course, based on the data that you're trying to extract, at some point in time, probably a minute or 2 later, you're going to see the status running as completed. So as soon as the status is completed, that means that the activity data or the lead data or the custom object data that you wanted to export out of Marketo has been nicely done. It's ready for you to export. And using the extract endpoint, you can extract those data out of Marketo. Using, of course, this is gonna again be a get call because you are you're getting data out of Marketo. So using that extract endpoint, again, you are going to be referencing that job using the job ID that you got when you created the job. You can extract that data out of Marketo. So this 4-step process is it basically goes into extracting chunks of data, huge chunks of data out of Marketo. And this definitely can build into a data pipeline where you are a lot of my clients, what they do is they have this nightly batch jobs running where they are exporting activities data, lead data, and feeding all of those data, of course, using this 4 endpoints for this entire pipeline. They are feeding that data into their custom data mart, their data warehouse solution for further analysis. So that is how the logic of extracting data out of Marketo works. And importing data, it's pretty simple. Again, I mean, we have the developer documentation very readily available in case you would want to check that out. And yeah, anything else that you would like to hear, add here, Corey?
Just exporting activity log data follows a similar process. So when you're exporting lead data or activity log data, it's all going to follow this bulk export process. But yeah,
the same
that's
architecture.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right, we're running a little bit low on time, so I'll try to go quickly through this, but wanted to talk a little bit about serverless compute. What is it? How does it work? Why is it important? Really, the key is, and you can read, this is directly from AWS, but it's cloud computing and it's called compute. And compute is basically a computation that is running a process, right? We're moving data from A to B to C to D, E, F, G, H, right? All the various things. And in cloud architecture, Lambdas are a very common process that you're going to hear about. Now, why is a Lambda important? A Lambda is important because a Lambda only runs when it's asked to run, meaning that it runs in a situation where it just computes once you make the request to have it compute. It's not a server, it's not always running, but once you ask for it, it will run, right? So it reduces the amount of cost that a company incurs, where if you had like an EC2 being a remote server on an AWS infrastructure, right? That's always running. So compute costs are always being calculated, versus a Lambda is only going to run when you ask it to run. So really that's important when you're building your architecture, saying, do I constantly need runtime to always be happening in the backend, or can I only request it to make it run at certain stages of my application? A great way to understand the general concepts of compute. Basically, you're running a computer computation that will create a process, and that process can then run by the code that it's being told to run, right? And you have AWS Lambdas, you've got Azure functions, and you've got Google functions. They all kind of fall in the same category of what they do. But the cloud service infrastructure, as an example, you can pair everything together, you can create events, you can do all kinds of fun stuff in your cloud architecture that allows for you to manage and service lots of different workloads. A great example being data pipelines. I built a data pipeline in my previous company, and I was able to take advantage of the capabilities of a Lambda, and I could push and pull data depending on what I needed and what my requirements were. So yeah, that's just a high level of what serverless compute looks like. If you have any more questions, please reach out. I'm happy to go in further detail. Cloud storage, another example of cloud storage, really it's just someone else's storage device, right? Where we store our images, where we store our files, where we store all of our pictures from our phone, right? That's kind of what cloud storage is. But the breakdown for an S3 cloud storage or blob, which is AWS, Google, and Azure, really is similar to what an images and files section of Marketo is, right? When I upload an image into images and files in Marketo, I now have a serviceable URL that I can go to view that image, right? Our design emails from Marketo depend on these resources being live on the web. And this is a great way of doing that, right? And AWS S3 is a prime example. I've used S3 to populate all kinds of different images, resources, anything that you can think of will follow similar suits, images and files, right? Now, someone might ask, well, why would I use an S3 versus use images and files? Great question. The reason why I would do that is because I can create events in cloud, right? So I can say, as soon as a piece of data is added to an S3 storage, I can actually trigger Lambdas, right? I could trigger a workload to move that data through the pipelines, through whatever I'm doing, right? In Marketo, images and files are more of a static element versus an S3 or cloud storage. You're able to then take advantages of different events that fire off of CloudWatch, which is another way of doing it. I can go into a lot of details. I'm a cloud practitioner, and I enjoy talking about this stuff. But it's important for you to all understand, like, what we're really doing in the back end is we're just moving things. We're moving things. We're moving images. We're moving files. You're moving data, and you're moving it through pipelines. You're moving through other constructs, right? You can get into even more depth of Kinesis streams and all the various things that follow. But we won't go into that today. But those are all kind of important constructs that you would want to understand when it comes to cloud compute, cloud storage, and just kind of how it all functions together. So let's jump forward to API integrations.
So let me cover the basic integration landscape that, as a practitioner, one should be aware of. I mean, and I personally think that this goes for this is something that every Marketo practitioner, or everyone who's working in tech, working with different systems, be aware of. So when it comes to integrating platforms, there are are like basically 4 stages that of course, based on the level of customization that you need to do to integrate those two platforms, you can basically have like 4 stages. So first, it's pretty basic. You have a native or launch point integration. These are the out-of-the-box integration offered, managed, and maintained and updated regularly by the platform provider itself. So when it comes to Marketo, I can say the Zoom integration, the LinkedIn reach, and the Facebook integration, all that sort of stuff that can be very easily integrated just by going to the launch point in Marketo. I would classify them as native or launch point integration. And in my opinion, these are the easiest to set up. You just punch in your credentials, map the corresponding fields, and once it's authenticated, you're good to go. And moving ahead, there's a we like if there's not a native or the launch point integration available, then you can go ahead with the IPaaS, platform as a service, or a middleware solution that basically provides you an interface through which you can integrate two platforms seamlessly. So internally, these platforms are basically making API calls, like transferring data between two platforms using API calls, but you don't need to worry about the backend. You just need to worry about how these two platforms are going to be integrated, what are the things that are going to be flowing from platform A to platform B, basically the data flow. And there are a lot of platforms such as the API Marketo that provide a drag and drop interface to integrate two platforms. And then we have the custom integration using public API endpoints. So a lot of times when it comes to establishing like the next two bullets, they are basically the custom integration. As a practitioner, you would need to like as a developer, you would need to, if there isn't a native integration and you are not going to be going with the route of IPaaS or middleware as a solution to integrate two platforms, you are going to be building that custom integration in-house. So either you can be building that custom integration using the available API endpoints. When I say available API endpoints, so for example, Marketo Engage, it has the lead endpoints available, asset endpoints, authentication endpoints, bulk extract, bulk import endpoints available for us to use. So these endpoints are basically managed by the platform provider itself. These endpoints allow you to integrate two systems seamlessly. And of course, you are going to be the one who is going to detect the logic, how the data flows from one system to another system, what API endpoints you need to use. That's it. You need not worry about managing, building, updating those API endpoints. That is something that the platform provider is going to do. And the last kind of integration, the most custom integration that you can build, I would say, is a custom integration using custom API endpoints. So in this case, you are not only building like integrating two platforms on your own, but you are also responsible for creating, managing, updating those API endpoints. So as we talked earlier, API endpoints are something that like API is something that allows you to transfer data between two systems. So with the custom API endpoints, you are responsible for building your API endpoints to detect the logic, how the API endpoints function, what are the data that would pass from one system to the another system, and all that stuff. And as you go, like in this entire landscape, as you go from top to bottom, you are going to be incurring, a higher time, resource, and effort to develop, or I would say, develop the integration between two platforms. So I like to, like when I see two systems, I like to, first thing that I see is out of these four, this entire landscape where the integration that I'm working on is going to be falling. And based on that, we can, of course, get more details and analyze the time, resource, and effort required to, facilitate and build out that integration.
Cool. All right. So custom integrations. Now we're definitely a little bit low on time. But I included in this examples of how you make your first calls directly into Marketo using the Marketo REST Python GitHub library from Jeb Castellane. And basically, you can follow these steps and add this code into your PyCharm Community Edition IDE. Super important. It definitely is a lot of fun to work in this process. And so the plan is that next week, Darshil and I are going to release a blog that will have all of this information available for the community to be able to take advantage of this and write your first calls. And when you do successfully write your first call into Python or using Python into Marketo, let me know about it, right? Because I love hearing about successes and people who are able to successfully execute those calls. So go ahead and jump to the next one. Next slide. Cool. So I included also the elements of what needs to be constant within your files. There's definitely different ways of doing this. I tried to simplify it as much as possible, but generally this loop of code that I provided will loop through as many IDs of an object in Marketo as you possibly can. And really you can go from, if you have drafts of registration pages and you run these calls, you'll have approved registration pages, right? So if you had 1,000 pages that you needed to approve, this is a great way of doing that, and it saves you a tremendous amount of time. So we'll post that in the blog since we're running a little bit low on time, but yeah, go ahead and talk about Power Query and what we're doing. Here are also some additional calls that you can make, and you can all use the loop and just rinse and repeat and process it however you need and whatever your requirements are.
Awesome, good stuff. Thank you so much for covering that, Corey. So moving ahead with the last part of our session. So the Power Query, I find this a very underutilized feature within the Marketo landscape. So Power Query is a way through which you can basically get all the data out of Marketo using the APIs, all the available APIs, be it the bulk APIs, the regular APIs. You can get all of those data seamlessly into the Excel spreadsheet itself. So in case you do not have your custom data warehouse, you do not have your data mart built out, you can, of course, bring all of those data to from Marketo to your Excel and do all the fun analytics stuff, pivot table, mix and match. So Marketo data, you can mix that data heterogeneously with the other analytics data that you're getting from other sources. So a lot of good stuff here. So I have laid down steps on how to create a Power Query in Excel. It's pretty simple. Just you need to be a little familiar with writing Power Queries, and there's an excellent developer documentation on Marketo's website where you can use some like ready-made snippets. Just need to update some of the API calls and logic, a little bit tweak in the logic based on how we want to extract the data out of Marketo into the Excel. So it's pretty simple. And of course, as Corey said, we are going to be doing a blog post next week. I will definitely include the detailed steps and some of the code snippets, ready-made code snippets that you can add it to your Excel, build the Power Query and get data out right into the Excel. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is a snippet of a basic query to get people from Marketo's lead database. So as soon as you run the query, you're going to be seeing like it's going to be making a call to Marketo with all the authentication parameters and the lead database parameters that you mentioned, the filters, and it's going to be extracting and bringing all of those data right into the Excel. And if you move on to the next slide, and you can convert all of those data into a well-formatted table. You can run this job as a bad job. So all your data gets refreshed right into the Excel. And yeah, no need to build out a static list like a smart campaign add leads to a static list, make the view, export, and then analyze it. You can do it right away in the Excel using Power Queries.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming to this. Thank you, Corey and Darshil, for sharing all of your knowledge. This was super helpful. Obviously, we don't have time for Q&A, but we will either do a new blog with all of the questions that we got, or we will include it in the blog that Corey and Darshil are writing. So don't you worry, we will get those answered. We will also send out this recording after the session. And again, make sure that you subscribe to our user group so that you get notified about all future events and get all the good stuff coming out of the CHAMP program. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much all for joining.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Bye. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.